At 11:47 p.m., while the entire world was fast asleep, a call was being recorded on a quiet street in Utah. This was no ordinary incident. It was a confession of a serious crime. Jennifer Gledhill, who appeared from the outside to be a respectable mother and military wife, had done something that shook the whole of America. Could a true soldier, who had faced enemies on the battlefield, really not be safe in her own home? Cottonwood Heights, Utah, is the sort of neighborhood where manicured lawns meet mountain panoramas, where people drive their children to school in comfortable family cars and wave to their neighbors with the easy confidence of those who believe they know one another well. It was here, in the seemingly idyllic setting, that Matthew Johnson and Jennifer Gledhill constructed what appeared to the outside world to be the quintessential American family. Matthew Johnson, 51, was no ordinary man. He was a Green Beret, a member of the Utah National Guard's elite 19th Special Forces Group, an institution built upon honor, discipline, and selfless sacrifice. He had served his country for well over a decade, earning the admiration and deep respect of everyone who had ever served alongside him. His fellow soldiers described him in terms that do not come easily within military culture. Brilliant, reliable, the sort of man you telephone when you need a straight answer. He was the person others turned to when the world became difficult. At home, Matthew was a father to 3 young children, aged 11, 7, and 5, who knew their dad as far more than a soldier. He was the man who turned up, the man who remained present, the man who was doing his very best, even as his marriage quietly disintegrated around him. Jennifer Gledhill, 42, presented an altogether different image to the world. She was the devoted military wife, the stay-at-home mother, the woman who held the household together whilst her husband served. Matthew's friends described her as nice and rather a homebody. She smiled at dinner gatherings. She was a familiar face in the neighborhood. She was, by all appearances, entirely unremarkable in the most ordinary sense. Beneath that surface, however, something deeply troubling had been festering for a very long time. By July 2024, the Johnson-Gledhill marriage had quietly crossed a threshold. From struggling to irretrievable, the couple had begun discussing divorce, and court documents that would later be unsealed painted a portrait far removed from the tranquil domestic life their neighbors believed they were witnessing. In August 2024, Jennifer made a significant legal move. She filed for a temporary protective order against Matthew, claiming she required legal protection from her own husband. It was a grave accusation, one that, had it been granted, would have dramatically altered the balance of power in the forthcoming divorce proceedings. But the court did not see what Jennifer had hoped it would. 3rd District Commissioner Russell Minus reviewed the evidence she submitted, video recordings, text messages, and records of their interactions, and arrived at a conclusion that flatly contradicted her narrative. The videos, he noted, showed Jennifer as unafraid and equally confrontational towards Matthew. The text messages she had sent to her husband were described in the court's own language as repeatedly berating, belittling, and demeaning, and more troublingly still, some appeared deliberately crafted to goad him into a violent response. Commissioner Minus dismissed the protective order on the 16th of September 2024. He concluded that no abuse had taken place, but more significantly, he recorded something that would later read like a warning that nobody heeded. The conduct of the parties over the past several months is representative of a highly dysfunctional marriage bringing out the worst in the parties, clearly suggestive that an action for divorce should have been filed long before reaching the current state of affairs. What the commissioner could not possibly have known, what nobody in that courtroom could have imagined, was that Jennifer had already moved well past divorce in her thinking. She had arrived at an entirely different decision. In the final weeks of his life, Matthew Johnson began to sense something he could perhaps not quite articulate, but understood instinctively: danger. According to close friends, Jennifer's erratic behavior had escalated to such a degree that Matthew no longer felt safe sleeping beneath the roof of his own home. He began spending nights at a Utah National Guard facility, trading his family bedroom for a bunk in a military building, not out of any indifference towards his children, but out of a genuine concern for his own safety. His longtime friend, retired Utah National Guardsman Kevin Thompson, had spoken with Matthew during those final days. Matthew had arrived at a firm and resolute conclusion. The marriage had to end. It was time to begin divorce proceedings. It was time to move forward. Thompson recalled that Matthew had made a degree of peace with that decision, painful as it was. But Matthew Johnson never got the opportunity to file those papers. What Matthew didn't know, what he was only beginning to uncover, was that Jennifer had been leading a double life throughout the slow collapse of their marriage. She was conducting an affair with another man. Not a fleeting dalliance, but an intense, all-consuming emotional entanglement that had become the very center of her private world. And she was determined to protect it at any cost. On the 19th of September 2024, just 2 days before she would commit murder, Jennifer did something that ought to have raised alarm but registered at the time as nothing more than a casual moment. She showed her lover a loaded firearm, a Glock 19X that she kept within the family home. He thought very little of it. Military households commonly possessed weapons. It seemed unremarkable. It was anything but. Prosecutors would later reveal that Jennifer's actions in the days preceding the 21st of September were not impulsive. They were methodical, deliberate. She had made arrangements for all 3 of her children to spend the night at their grandparents' home, the home of Jennifer's own parents, Thomas and Rosalie Gledhill. The children would not be in the house when it happened. The stage had been carefully set. All that remained was the act itself. The 20th of September 2024. The day began unremarkably enough, but by the evening, the fragile equilibrium of the Johnson-Gledhill household had finally and catastrophically shattered. Matthew had discovered the truth about Jennifer's affair. Witnesses would later report having heard a fierce argument between the couple that night. Years of dysfunction, resentment, manipulation, and betrayal had at last erupted into the open. According to Jennifer's own subsequent confession, Matthew confronted her directly, shouting at her because he now knew the full truth about what she had been doing behind his back. The row was violent in its emotion, raw. The kind of confrontation that strips away every pretense and exposes only the ugliest core of what a relationship has become. And then the house fell silent. In the early hours of the 21st of September 2024, whilst Matthew Johnson lay sleeping in the master bedroom of his own home, entirely unaware, entirely defenseless, Jennifer took his 9mm handgun and shot him in the head. He never woke up. What followed reveals a degree of cold-blooded premeditation that is genuinely difficult to comprehend. Jennifer did not panic. She did not reach for the telephone. She did not sit in stunned silence at what she had done. Instead, she set about her work with chilling composure. She placed Matthew's body into a rooftop storage container. She maneuvered it down the staircase of their home and loaded it into the back of their family minivan. She smashed his mobile phone to destroy whatever data it contained. She drove his truck to a nearby neighborhood and abandoned it several streets from their house. Then she drove north, with her husband's body in the back of the vehicle. Jennifer Gledhill drove towards northern Utah and buried Matthew Johnson in a shallow, unmarked grave at a location she has never fully disclosed. A location that to this day has not been found. When she returned home, the cleanup began. She bleached the walls. She used carpet cleaning products throughout the master bedroom where Matthew had been killed, and she placed an order for a new mattress because the old one, saturated with her husband's blood, could not conceivably be explained away. The new mattress arrived just 2 days later. On the evening of the 22nd of September, Jennifer Gledhill drove to her lover's home, and she told him everything. She described shooting Matthew. She explained how she had disposed of the body. She recounted the cleanup in detail. She was matter-of-fact, unsettlingly calm. When her lover noticed bruising on her arms and inquired about it, she told him without hesitation that she had sustained the marks whilst digging the grave and scrubbing the crime scene. The man sitting opposite her was terrified. This woman he believed he knew, the woman with whom he had been intimate, the woman he thought he understood, had just confessed to murdering her husband with an almost casual indifference. He did not know what to do. But he knew with absolute certainty that he could not simply pretend he had heard nothing. He began recording their conversations. Days later, Jennifer telephoned him. The recording captured what would become the most haunting piece of audio evidence in the entire case. When he told her he was frightened by what she had confessed, her response stopped investigators cold. "Wow, if you think I could even hurt a fly." Like he's not a person. He wasn't a person anymore. He wasn't Matt. She had dehumanized her husband so completely that his death, in her own mind, was not murder. It was removal. He had ceased to be a person to her, and once that had happened, everything became permissible. The conversation continued. When her lover asked whether she would feel afraid if the situation were reversed, if someone had done to her precisely what she had done to Matthew, Jennifer replied without a moment's hesitation, "Not if I deserved it." And then, in a moment of truly alarming self-revelation, she continued, "I always preached that I was like the Queen of Hearts in my past lives. Unlike, off with their heads. If we could just round up the scum of this earth, put them on an island, or simply kill them all, I could shipshape this country back to a decent place." She then asked her lover not to think of her as a monster. She wanted him to remember who she had been before she had opened her mouth. The irony was devastating. She was appealing for understanding after confessing to murdering the father of her 3 children in cold blood whilst he slept. Most tellingly of all, this conversation took place before Matthew Johnson had even been reported missing. Jennifer was already speaking of her husband in the past tense. She was already living in the world where he no longer existed. 6 days after killing Matthew, Jennifer finally telephoned the police. She reported her husband as missing, informing officers that Matthew had told her he would be away for a week and had asked her not to contact him. It was a simple, plausible account, the sort of thing a military spouse might reasonably say about a man who occasionally disappeared for duty. But Matthew's unit had already noticed his absence. When he failed to report for duty on the 23rd of September, the Utah National Guard launched its own internal search. Something was clearly wrong. Matthew Johnson did not simply fail to show up without reason. Meanwhile, Jennifer's lover had spent days in profound moral turmoil. He was in possession of screenshots of their text messages. He had recordings of her confessions. And on the 2nd of October 2024, he contacted Cottonwood Heights Police Department and handed over everything he had. The investigation that followed moved with considerable speed. When officers executed a search warrant on the Johnson-Gledhill home on the 28th of September, they found precisely what Jennifer had worked so hard to erase. In the master bedroom, beneath the bed, there was a large section of blood-soaked carpet. Blood was also discovered on the bed frame slats. The entire room carried a powerful smell of bleach. Reddish-brown stains marked the walls, the window blinds, and the frame itself. And the mattress that ought to have shown years of ordinary use, was brand new. Phone records confirmed that Jennifer had placed the order on the 24th of September, 3 days after the murder. It had been delivered 2 days later. GPS data retrieved from Jennifer's mobile phone completed the picture. Her phone had tracked her movements on the 21st of September to the location where Matthew's abandoned truck was eventually found at approximately 6 o'clock in the morning, and then northwards, towards Davis County, in precisely the direction she herself had described when confessing to her lover. On the 2nd of October 2024, Jennifer Gledhill was arrested and charged with first-degree murder and obstruction of justice. 3 weeks later, the case took a turn that few had anticipated. On the 24th of October 2024, Jennifer's parents, Thomas Gledhill, aged 71, and Rosalie Gledhill, aged 67, were arrested on 4 counts each of obstruction of justice. Police had established that the couple had spent over 5 hours at Jennifer's home in late September, despite having told investigators they had only been there briefly to collect some clothing. Rosalie Gledhill, it emerged, had purchased the replacement mattress, the very one intended to conceal the evidence of murder. She had also had her own mobile phone remotely wiped, erasing all records of her whereabouts during the cleanup period. Thomas Gledhill made an error that exposed him entirely. When questioned by detectives about the master bedroom and the alleged cleanup operation, he told them, "I did not go in where the incident happened." He had not been informed there was an incident. Only someone with prior knowledge could possibly have said that. During a subsequent search of the Gledhill family home, police discovered the Block 19X gun box, the same firearm Jennifer had shown her lover 2 days before the murder, wrapped inside a child's baby grow and concealed within a plastic storage tote near Jennifer's bedroom. The family had attempted to make the evidence disappear. They had not succeeded. Months passed. Search parties were assembled. Law enforcement officers, volunteers, and Matthew's own fellow Green Berets, men who had served beside him for years, spread across northern Utah in search of him. The operation expanded from Davis and Weber counties northwards, all the way to Box Elder County near the Utah-Idaho border. Over 70 searchers took part. John Hash, who had served alongside Matthew for 12 years, struggled to reconcile what had taken place, having had Jen in our home before, breaking bread with them. It turned out she's responsible for his death. It was shocking, frankly. Kevin Thompson, Matthew's longtime friend, said the ongoing search kept him awake at night. A vehicle storage container was eventually located floating in water. Inside, investigators found Matthew Johnson's blood. Further physical evidence. Further confirmation of what had occurred. But Matthew himself, the soldier, the father, the Green Beret who had survived everything his country had ever asked of him, had still not been brought home. His body has not been found. Jennifer Gledhill has entered a not guilty plea to all charges against her. The charges she faces are considerable. 1 count of first-degree murder, 5 counts of obstruction of justice, 1 count of abuse or desecration of a human body, 1 count of tampering with a witness, and 1 count of possession of a controlled substance. At her bail hearing, prosecutors disclosed that Jennifer had told her lover she would shoot herself before allowing herself to be taken into custody. The judge denied bail. She remains remanded at Salt Lake County GAO. There is also the matter of money. Matthew Johnson held a $500,000 life insurance policy with Credential Life, with Jennifer listed as the named beneficiary. With murder charges pending and Matthew's body still unrecovered, Credential has petitioned the court to determine who is legally entitled to receive those funds. 3 children, aged 11, 7, and 5 at the time of their father's murder, have now lost both parents, 1 to violence, 1 to a prison cell. Matthew Johnson's family issued a statement through their victim representative that captures, in quiet and dignified words, the true human cost of what Jennifer Gledhill chose to do. We are hopeful that we will find Matt soon, or that Jennifer or someone will come forward with the location of his body so we can properly lay him to rest. They are still waiting. The prosecution's case is straightforward in theory, even if it is appalling in reality. Jennifer Gledhill killed her husband because he had discovered her affair and because she wished to be free, not the slow, complicated freedom that comes with divorce proceedings, with custody arrangements, financial settlements, and the messy practicalities of separating 2 lives. She wanted the clean, absolute freedom that only arrives when there is nobody left to negotiate with. She chose murder over paperwork, and in doing so, she destroyed 3 children's childhoods, shattered 2 families, robbed the world of a decorated soldier who had devoted his life to the service of others, and left an entire community wrestling with a question it cannot answer. How does a mother of 3 make this calculation? Perhaps the recorded telephone call reveals more than anything else about who Jennifer Gledhill truly is. Not the woman her neighbors saw, not the woman who smiled at dinner gatherings, not the dutiful military wife, but the woman who, days after burying her husband in an unmarked grave in the Utah wilderness, looked her lover in the eye and said, with no tremor in her voice and no remorse in her words, he wasn't a person anymore. Somewhere in the hills of northern Utah, Matthew Johnson is still waiting to come home. His children are still waiting too. Jennifer Gledhill's trial, originally scheduled for December 2025, has been delayed. A pre-trial conference is now set for April 10, 2026, with the trial expected to move forward in the summer of 2026. Matthew Johnson's body has still not been recovered. The search continues.